Hello, hey, we are back here on Founders Live. This is the Founders ROC, and I am joined by Glenn Thorson. He's over there in London. How you doing, Glenn?
Hey Nick, doing very well, thanks. Yourself?
I'm doing great, except the fact that it's absolutely downpouring rain here in Seattle. It's crazy, and it's one of those mornings where traffic doesn't move, no one's moving at the right pace, and it's one of those days.
Excellent. We've actually managed to somehow have dry weather all day in London, which just didn't look like it was going to happen. So we'll probably get the rain tomorrow.
Nice, great. Hey, so we are joined by Glenn, who is a part of the Rocketeer organization, and just let's give it a little brief on the Rocketeer organization real quick.
Yeah, so Rocketeer, we engage with all manner of individuals, teams, businesses, right from startup points through to larger organizations, whatever sort of phase you may be. We also engage publicly, things like workshops, speaking engagements, and really where our core focus sits is always on tapping into the best elements of who you are, be that again as an individual, as a group, or a team, and just helping enable you to be the best version of whatever it is that you're setting out to be, and to enhance those elements that you've got within yourself.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, I've been a fan of you guys for a while now, and I love what you guys are doing. And interestingly enough, the Founders Rock is a conversation between us at Founders Live and Rocketeer around very foundational principles of entrepreneurship and really building companies. And today we are talking about personal values and really how they influence not only us as business owners, founders, but also how they infiltrate the company. And Glenn, I'm just going to throw it out to you to start with. What do personal values mean to you, and how do you see that when you talk to other founders, especially from the Rocketeer perspective? How do you just even go into personal values and how they are connected into the company and the business?
Well, from our perspective, and mine especially as well, from a personal angle, I guess, it's huge, right? I mean, personal values, they define the decisions that you make. They have a real influence on how you grow the business going forward. Especially those initial decisions that you make, which are often very key, right? You go for that one big contract to keep you afloat for the next 6 months, or do you take a bunch of smaller deals that maybe aren't the right deals? There's all these different types of elements. At the end of the day, it's going to be, to a very large extent, if not almost entirely, it's going to be your personal values that influence this, especially if you're a founder on their own. I mean, if you're part of a smaller team of founders, then obviously you've got this interesting interplay of everyone's values and how that then breeds into the company that you're creating. But at the end of the day, especially at that early stage, right, these values, who you are, they are going to be what your company is, unless obviously you've got some other factors at play behind the scenes, such as investors that are maybe pulling you away from your personal values. I think that's a really interesting dynamic to explore as well, which is always that side of, you've got an individual, they've got an idea and a business, but then you start to throw in the complexities of investment, and that can very often pull people away from their values, and that's when you start to see these sort of other elements come into play. You have difficulties between agents of the business, whatever it may be. There's a lot of things that can come out of that, and I'm sure plenty of people, like you've spoken with yourself as well, have been in these delicate situations where you've had to go out there as a founder and take on an investment, and it's really put you in a tough spell. It puts a lot of stress on you because maybe you're suddenly making decisions that you don't want to make. There's a lot of things to consider, and I think from a founder's perspective, or a piece of advice to people that are kicking off and getting out there, do everything that you can, especially that early phase, to stay true to your values and have the freedom to stay true to those values, because
Yeah.
it's going to make it a much easier and more enjoyable journey for you, for sure.
Yeah, and maybe the next question is, what are personal values? And it's kind of, a hazy, I guess, term. How would you describe personal values, and how should someone be able to identify them within themselves?
So I would say, personal values are, at the end of the day, from a psychological perspective, it's the state we have when we're thinking at the absolute minimal point. So it's what you do naturally when you don't overthink things. So ideally, it's that whole scenario where you call out 5 scenarios or situations in quick succession, and you've got 2 words to respond. Whatever's coming out right away without any thinking time, that's grounded in your personal values. A lot of people would like to, if they've been given the question and a piece of paper in 5 minutes, they'll come up with trust, and they'll come up with authenticity, and basically, I think most people will come up with 90% of the same responses, because it's what we want the world to see us as, and it's a good image that we want to be. And that's not to say that it's not possible for people to have those values or embody those, but we've all got positives and negatives, and we've got to embrace those. And to truly understand your own values and what matters to you and what drives you, it's to acknowledge and be aware of that state you have when you fall back to that most, wants to say, I guess, lowest common denominator version of yourself, right?
Right. And do you think that those are born, or do you think those are learned early in life, and so they're formed over the years before you actually start the company or start your entrepreneurial journey?
I would say a little bit of both, but even more so, a third element, which you didn't even mention, which is we're always evolving as individuals, as human beings, as elements or cogs or whatever you want to call it within the society and the business landscape that we're a part of. We have the ability, if we want to, and we're open to it, to change and evolve and adapt every single day. I mean, you could go out and experience something tomorrow that had such an impact on you mentally that it wouldn't change you tomorrow, but it would open you up to maybe see certain scenarios or elements differently. And over the course of the next 6 months, that could change the values that you have. And there are assessments out there which can actually prove that as well. There's a tool that we use a lot called IWAM, which is an inventory of work attitude mindset, work and attitude mindsets. And basically that shows, a lot of people that we work with from a coaching perspective, you can take an image, because it's purely an image of you right now. You take the assessment, and that can change dramatically over a 12 or an 18-month period, especially if you throw in things such as coaching or mentoring, things that are designed to go in and really provoke how you think and get you to look at yourself and see if there are things that you can change because you want to change them, things that you can change because you start to learn something different. So yeah, I mean, obviously you're born with something, you're raised with your family and your friends and your culture, that has a big imprint on you. But I think that only really generates the canvas that you have. Once you reach that point of anywhere from 16 to 25, and you start to get out there in a business perspective, from an entrepreneurial side, that's when you really start to control yourself, where you want to go and how you want to develop.
Yeah, it's interesting. The reason why I asked the question, part of it is we're born with certain traits, we're born with certain ways to approach life and inevitably business. And then there are ways to influence that, coaching, mentorship, and just actually experience in general. And I find it interesting that some people are more receptive to the change and to the coaching and mentoring, and some people aren't. What do you find in that direction, and how would you work with someone that might be resistant to some of these changes?
Well, first off, yeah, I think you're completely right. There's definitely a big split across people's attitudes, and I think it's not just with coaching or mentoring; it's with a lot of things like spirituality or various types of healing and all these types of things. And I think a large part of it is the way that we're built up as humans and individuals. Is if we're truly set in our head that something's not going to work, that's probably going to be the biggest influencer that it won't work. Whereas if we're open and willing to give something an opportunity, or at least run it through the process, or whatever it may be, then maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. There's a whole lot of other factors that come into play on that side. But the very fact that you're open to the possibility is more telling about you than anything else.
Yeah.
So that's obviously a big part.
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking as you're talking, just an example, and I'll share one, and then I'm curious if some examples that you might see more in the general public. But, when I think about personal values and how they influence even leadership in the company, I would say a couple of names come to mind, but one is actually, interestingly enough, it's Tim Cook. at Apple, and some of the things that have happened in the last year, especially like the whole the FBI was basically pressuring Apple to unlock their phones and do all that for like the crime, and some of the stuff that happened in the U.S. and Apple very much stood firm. And I think although there's some business cases for probably the reason why they didn't, they also, and this really does come from the top, and I think Tim Cook just basically said no, like that we don't do that. And it's his belief and his personal values that influenced how the company stood firm and basically stood firm against the U.S. government. In the end, it really wasn't a big deal. The government walked away. They got it in a different way, and I think that's one example of a personal value. And then secondly, his values around, essentially fair treatment of, I guess, minorities or gay and lesbian and all that. He clearly, given where he stands in that decision, they also, as a company, he's bringing those values into how they view the world and treat employees and customers in general. And so I think that's a good example of bringing personal values into, and actually not only bring personal values into the culture of the business, but personal values seep in regardless. And so they've embraced them more than hid them. So do you have any ideas or examples that you could pull out of leaders, or whether they're small startups or large companies, that are utilizing personal values in that way?
Yeah, I think first off, that's a great example, right? I mean, that way that you can take something in, and whether it's a small company or massive, you stand firm, because it generates such a strong following. When you look at a company like Apple, I mean, they have a very, very much a cult following, a large demographic. So it's something which continues to reinforce who they are as a brand. A couple of others which I was thinking of earlier as well, just thinking before our chat. I mean, Starbucks is another one of those which they're massive, and a lot of people say they've lost touch with what they originally did, and a lot of those elements. But when you look at how they engage from a community perspective, they've very much stayed true to that initial phase of what they were trying to do, which was always to create a culture of coming together and bringing people into a common space. And that's everything from how they continue to build the stores, and even little things like free Wi-Fi or whatever it may be, that just gives people that common space they can leverage. But also things like the donation programs that they have. I mean, here in the UK, in London, for example, every single Starbucks has a basket of bottled water, and it always says how much has this store generated in donations to the program, and all the other elements as well. Like, I just received an email from them, I think it was yesterday, saying now that the Christmas coffees and all those ones, the holiday coffees and beverages are launching, if you nominate your charity of choice, then 5 pence, so what's that, 6 or 7 cents of every time I purchase a beverage up until the 24th of December, that's going to actually be donated by Starbucks to the charity that I nominate. And it wasn't even a drop-down list of maybe 5 that you sometimes get. It literally generated a response email and said, I want to nominate charity XYZ, fill out the details. So that's a really, really cool thing to reach out and do. And from a company that's gotten to that stage, that's definitely not what, at least I wouldn't have expected that from them. And I'm sure most people have the same sort of almost cynical view at the end of the day. Once you get to that size, you can't have these little things. But that was definitely someone in there had a great idea and got it pushed through. And it's fantastic to see, because they should be doing things like that when you get to that size. There's no reason you can't continue to stay true to that, which is great.
Yeah, that's a great example, and they're right here in our backyard, and we see it all the time. They are one of the more, I guess you would say, more outwardly or outgoing companies that present a lot of those values very upfront. And I think a question now would be, it's a fine line, because a company, or especially if you're a smaller company and you have your values can more even drastically affect your outwardly perspective that others have on the company. How should founders be careful on this? Because there is a danger to maybe, quote, stand for possibly the wrong value or promote something that's questionable, how should founders be careful on this?
I mean, well, for the most part, it's something which I would say it's almost a self-created problem. I mean, what we've created with social media and visibility and all of that, access to data and information, we've almost created a problem of what do you stand for. I mean, you're getting scenarios now where, for example, a football or soccer player, from your guys' perspective, he was suddenly called up. This was about 4 months ago. He was called into question because of some tweets that he'd made, I think about 8 years ago. And I mean, from a context perspective, 8 years down the line, for most people's sake, you're a different person. You've gone through so much change, and he was still a teenager at the time of these tweets and all these things. There's so many factors that come into play. Plus, then you can ask the questions of, was it taken out of context? Was it all the scenarios? But at the end of the day, I think social media is probably the biggest element where you can be called into question for your values. You can like a post, or you can share a friend's post, or even, God forbid, you can have a friend that, gets on and posts something from your profile because it's hilarious. And if you're a small business owner, then typically everything is tied to everything because you're trying to promote on all angles, right? So you're using your social profiles from a personal perspective and a business perspective. You're sharing across all of those. It's very easy to blur those lines. And, some people don't want to have lines between them because that's how they engage, whereas other people are very good at keeping those lines. But even, from just personal branding, look at how many people have troubles with interviews because, again, social profiles are looked at. And I think that's a new challenge that we haven't really seen before, even as founders, because, there's been these nice, almost hard lines that sort of bound up the edges. But no, now you can define a business, and if you've got the wrong connection between your own social elements, then that becomes a big problem. I think if you're, again, a group of founders and not just a single entity, then that probably makes it a little bit easier because you've always got a sort of consortium of opinions, if you will, and things are sort of put through multiple internal angles and all of those things. So it's definitely good to, if you are on your own as a founder, have a close network of friends or something like Founders Live, a community where you can, run these scenarios through other people that have similar mindsets to yourself, that see problems maybe you didn't see. There's a lot of opportunity out of it, but yeah, definitely it's a tough one.
Yeah. And how do you see personal values affecting or influencing even hiring, for that matter? You've got someone that you as a founder or a hiring manager is looking at to bring onto your own team. How do you see those values coming into play there?
I think that one is that one's always going to be there, right? I mean, that's again coming back to how we're made up, almost from a psychological perspective. Whether it's in a professional engagement from a hiring perspective, or even just collaborating on a project or meeting someone at a conference, you're always drawn to people that you identify with from a personal perspective. So they share some common values, or they have values that you deem socially attractive, or you deem that you believe are more honorable, more trustworthy. That's always going to have a big influence. So but at the end of the day, if you're sitting there as the person on the other side that's being almost, for lack of a better term, being judged through those filters, you've still got to try to stay true to your own personal values, because if you're projecting something that you feel might get you over the line or might get you that piece of business, well, you may just be delaying whatever disconnect that you were going to have on day 1 to day 7 or whatever it may be. You're not doing yourself any favors by projecting a false front just because you think it's going to get you to stage 2. So it's definitely a matter of being true to those values all the time and knowing what they are, right? So you can play to your strengths.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point. What you just mentioned was, when you as the individual that possibly are making that decision of hiring, and you internally in your gut or just in your intuition, you feel something, you think something, it's not right, it's off, just not a good fit with your values. But if you decide to move forward for any reason, you are just pushing, down the line. You're putting off what is inevitable, which is a clash between you or your organization and that individual or that organization in the value structure, and it's not going to be good. And so I think sometimes people struggle with that challenge. They struggle with that issue. And that's why I brought it up. Is I think it's a very incredible like challenge, and being strong enough to make that decision to say no, or to say, to turn down the deal. Maybe it's an acquisition deal that you personally are going to financially benefit, but deep down inside, this company does not align with what we're about. That's a scary situation, right? Because like you're going to turn down, you might upset investors, you might personally not take or be able to earn quite a bit of financial gain because your value system is going to be crossed and it's not going to work. I mean, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that it's such a delicate and incredibly interesting area to explore as well. And if there's anyone out there that's watching or that sees or hears this, please love to get examples or scenarios or anything like that, because this is a massive one. I mean, I've been involved in previous startups and things myself as well, where you're at that point where it's, so do we take this contract with this client? We know it's not going to be good business for what we're trying to build, but it is what's going to keep the lights on for 6 months. So you're stuck with this. It's not even an ethical dilemma, really. It's a matter of, do we want to continue doing what we're doing because we know we can get something great, but to get that, we're going to have to bite this real sour apple somewhere and just find a way to get through? Or do we say no and hope that somehow in the next month we find some other way to keep going? I mean, it really pushes you to the limit. And again, that's where, as a founder, it requires a lot of strength, a lot of confidence, but also sometimes, it's just shit annoying luck. Like, do you get the luck that someone else comes along that means you don't have to make that tough decision? Or do you make it and trust yourself? I mean, there are so many elements to it, and it's a real tough one. I don't think there's a perfect answer for anyone at the end of the day, because I've also known scenarios where people have taken that almost wrong decision, but they've been strong enough by themselves or as a very small group of people in the company to actually fight through and see out whatever bad business it was to then get to the next stage. So it's definitely not a recommendation out there for anyone that's stuck on that decision to say, hey, definitely we're not going to do it because it doesn't seem to be right. But at the same time, you've really got to look at yourself and say, do we have what's required within myself or within whoever we are as a team to get through it, or is it going to break us? In which case we may be better off taking a step back and finding the next way, which if you've got the right stuff, it's going to happen. You've just got to keep looking for it.
Yeah, it's not an easy decision at all. So before we finish up here, how would you advise, let's say it's an early stage founder, they are just starting their company, they're just starting, maybe they're looking for co-founders or hiring on their first employees and individuals. What steps should they take to, one, identify their values, and two, really understand how they form the company culture that they are building right now?
So, I mean, as far as identifying the values, I mean, that's an exercise you need to conduct with yourself and with whoever you're launching the company with, right? You got to really take an honest look. And values, we at Rocketeer, personally, I don't believe you should ever have more than 4, because then it becomes superfluous and you're just grabbing anything that's out there. You've really got to distill it down. And a value can have sub emotions to it or can have sub elements to it that define the value itself, but you've really got to be specific and get in there and say, what is the absolute most important thing to you? And that's not just how you want to be as an individual, it's how you want the organization or the company to be perceived. It's what you want to bring out as a benefit to society or to your marketplace or whatever it is that you're trying to create. And when it comes to those things, it really is just a matter of be specific and that be honest to yourself, so that you know that when stress starts to build up and decisions are being made, not just because you've got 3 days to make the decision, but it's you're under pressure and there are a lot of things that have to be done. This should, at the end of the day, be what comes natural to you, what's easy, but easy in the sense that it's easy because it's right for you and for you as a team and a business. That's when you've got the values that are right for what you want to do.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I've noticed you know, in the weirdest way, it's like one of the most important things to do for the early stage company, like one of the paramount early important things to do, and yet it should not be incredibly difficult because you just said it's things that should come natural. You shouldn't sit up there for days and weeks on the whiteboard saying what are the words that really, you know, it's there. It's the way you are as a person. It's the way that you conduct your team initially. You know, it's the way that it's possibly the industry you're in the product or service that you're creating. There's just natural words or feelings, emotions that come out of that, and it shouldn't be like squeezing, you know, juice out of a lemon. And you know, but in weird ways, it's actually very paramount to the company.
Well, sometimes it can be freeing as well because it can help refocus you. I mean, at the end of the day, it gets yourself back under a microscope. You know, you can maybe pick out some things that you've been spiraling out on. And something else which I think is quite interesting, but also really well good to keep in mind is that there's nothing wrong with redefining your values. I mean, let's say you've launched the company and then 6, 12, 18 months down the line, you've brought in some partners or you've brought on an investor or whatever it may be. You know, your business direction can change, your product can evolve, and so can your values. But you know, for that to happen, you've got to be honest and you've got to sit down as a group or whatever's happened and say, right, you know, these values no longer fit. And I think these are better, and here's why. And if that's the case, that's very easy. People, again, it should be natural. So if whatever it was on day one doesn't apply for some reason, then there's nothing wrong with that. For a lot of companies, it's actually really healthy because it helps to refocus you for the next phase.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that because I think it is important to know that, you know, these values are important, especially in the beginning. They could change, and they, you know, as people change, companies change. You can reassess and reevaluate what those values are at that time. So it's really important. But hey, Glenn, want to thank you again for your time. This has been great, and you know, we're here every week on the Founders ROC. We're running through about 30 different call them values, call them foundational principles, and I am not 100% sure what next week is all about. I'll check the list and we will push it out on Founders Live, make sure everyone knows. But any parting words for us this week?
No, just thanks a lot, Nick. Hopefully you can survive the rain and get back safe.
Yeah, you know, we're used to it over here, so but great.
Yeah,
hey,
that's one area where we're on the same page, London and Seattle. We both get a lot of that rainy stuff.
Yep. All right. Well, until next week, Glenn. Thank you. This is Nick Hughes. We are on Founders Live, and that's founderslive.com. If you have not checked it out, it's an incredible social platform and environment for founders and entrepreneurs to connect and really just stay in the game. And Glenn has been adding a lot of great content on there, and looking forward to seeing more.
Awesome. Thanks a lot.
All right.
Nick. Take it easy.
Yep. Thank you, Glenn.